Welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome for those who's watching us through the internet. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. We continue talking about Emmanuel. This month we will be talking about the different works that Emmanuel Frushik Xavier share with us. And today we have Joe to do the lecture with the theme Divine Justice and Emmanuel. But before we start, I'm going to invite Marcus to do the reading and initial prayer, and just after that we go straight to the lecture. Thank you.
I'm gonna read a message from the book Happy Life from Divaldo Pereira Franco by Joana de Angelis, the Spirit. Be open to new ideas. Discuss them, compare them with what you know and think. Get the most benefit possible out of information that's new to you. Healthy ideas renew the emotions and supply the feelings with stimulus and enthusiasm. Nobody is so wise that they do not need to learn more, or need to learn more or so complete that they can dispense with other contributions to their inner growth. Learn more and be receptive to new contributions. I'm going to ask you, everybody, to close your eyes and let's ask our Father, God, our Master, Jesus, and all the spiritual friends we have here in our house to help us to open our hearts, open our minds, our ears to listen to the message, the lessons that we're gonna learn here today from our friend Joe. And I'm gonna ask them to help and inspire Joe to give us what we need to continue our evolution and this path in direction to do good and become pure spirits and make this world a better world. Thank you, so be it.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to see so many happy, smiling faces here. Early in the year, working towards self-knowledge, more improvement in our lives, and a better understanding of why we're here. So today, this was going to be an interesting lecture. It was supposed to be between Sandra and I. We're going to do a dual lecture. And unfortunately, she got a very bad cold. And she's at home resting, and hopefully she'll be watching us anytime soon. As Matthew said, the theme of the month is Emmanuel. And there's so much we could think and study and present around Emmanuel. Everything from the historic series of books that bring us great stories, inspiring stories around the beginning of Christianity, to a number of more technical books around the evolution of spirits, about mediumship. But I thought that we would focus today on some of his work around the doctrine itself. And every year we start the year slowly. Some light lectures in the beginning, building up to more deeper thought and deeper understanding. So I thought we'll change everything. Let's start with the deep stuff since you all came here anyway. Thinking was going to be light. We're going to have some deeper understanding and deeper discussion around some very important thoughts. And to me personally, nothing is more important than understanding the concept of divine justice. So that's why I chose this for us today. And I always like this quote by Blaise Pascal. It says, the finite is annihilated in the presence of the infinite. So no matter, think of anything very big, compared to the infinite, that thing is nothing. A planet, a sun, a whole constellation, compared to the infinite, it is annihilated, it disappears. And so is and becomes pure nothing. So our spirit before God. God is so much bigger than us, then we're just a very small part. And so our justice before the divine justice. So just as material things disappear or become less important compared to the bigger infinite, so is our sense, our knowledge, or very limited knowledge of what is our justice compared to something so much bigger, which is the divine justice. Just a kind of just setting the context here. Within our limitations, as I said, we would wish that this world, and we're all good people, we all want happiness, we all want the best for everyone. That's part of being a spiritist. But we would like to see a world where everyone would be equal and everybody obeys the law. Wouldn't that be great? That people would be judged based on the truth. We're still imperfect, so even if we're all equal and we try to obey the laws, we will fail. Because that's our nature, because we are imperfect. But when we fail, we would like to be judged based on the facts, on the truth. We also want us to be punished, or other people to be punished, based on the severity of their mistake. People that make bigger mistakes should have bigger punishments, right? Makes sense to us, very logical. And those who do their effort, do their best to comply with the laws, they should be rewarded as good individuals. So in this kind, that's my vision. This kind of defines our idealized vision of justice. It's all about cause and effect. Good deeds get rewards, bad deeds get punishment to the extent that they deserve. But one thing called reality comes head on against this, because our laws are not perfect. They were designed by men who are imperfect, so the laws are imperfect. Those who we have decided to judge are also not perfect. They're human beings. They can make honest mistakes, and they can make fraudulent, corrupt mistakes as well. So what do? We don't know the truth. Take any kind of a high-profile kind of news. We think we know the truth, but we don't. Right? Even where we're present and observe things, we think we know the truth, but very often the truth is much deeper and bigger than we even have a clue. So how can we be judged on the truth? Others are not punished for their mistakes, and we think we're not rewarded for the good things we do. Right? So that's not perfect either. We were created equal. We're all spirits, created simple and ignorant, but we're all at different evolutionary levels. So that ideal world that we thought that we could one day have means that everybody's kind of coming together at the same evolutionary pace. But that's not true either. So what does this all mean? Well, if you think now from a perspective of divine judgment, and this is a very kind of impactful picture, it is about justice and divine vengeance, pursuing crime. So we are still at a level of evolution that our sense of justice gets very often confused with vengeance. And that is not the divine way. Where we are driving to one day is a bit different. We're trying to evolve into a happy world where there is only one truth, the truth, and the divine laws are the only laws. So these laws are perfect. They were created by God, not by men. If these are the laws that we follow based on His truth, things become a lot easier for us. Only through following these laws can we find a path to happiness. And more difficult for us to understand, there are no judges in a happy world. Probably better to say we are all our own judges. And the law of cause and effect provides true balance according to our deeds. These are some of the characteristics of the divine justice. Very complex for us to understand because it is very different than what we've been taught, that we've been educated, or what is human justice, legal justice, social justice. Because of that complexity, one of the 5 books that Kardec wrote, called Heaven and Hell, we have it here in our library, in our bookstore, is actually, its original title was called Divine Justice According to Spiritism. It addresses exactly this topic of what are God's laws and how will be judged and how will this impact in our evolution. It was printed in 1865, so it just commemorated 150 years last year. And the description that Kardec said is a comparative examination of the doctrines concerning the passage from corporeal life to spirit life, concerning future punishment, reward, concerning angels and demons, concerning suffering. Now, 5 books from Kardec. Everybody basically reads the Spirit's book, reads the Gospel according to Spiritism, and a good number might even look at the Medium's books. But the last 2 books are not so popular because they are deeper, they are more difficult to understand, and require reading them several times. And this includes Heaven and Hell and includes the Genesis as well. That's why we've over a year now, we've been studying Heaven and Hell in our Thursday meetings. Exactly to give us a first round, and we're going to continue to do this often, to look at this so undervalued book that Kardec has given us and trying to understand. Now, the theme is about Emmanuel, so let's talk about Emmanuel. So what does Emmanuel have to do with the doctrinal books? Well, Emmanuel understands and knows that we would have difficulty in understanding that. So, through Chico Xavier, he wrote a series of excellent books that were to address each one of the various doctrinal books. So he provides a little bit explanations and inspiration and other thoughts that we should take into consideration relating to each one of the books. So so we have the religion of the spirits, right? So this is the field of mediums and the spirit of truth. So these takes care of the spirit's books, the medium's book, and the gospel. So all of what these are each one of them are a collection of messages that Chico Xavier would receive over many, many weeks. Each message became a section in each of these books. And each one of them creates a collection that explains a particular book from Kardec. Unfortunately, they are still not translated into English. And that's why we try to make an effort here in our lectures to bring little bits and pieces of each one of those and give you a sense. And we do know that there is effort being done to translate them into English. Relevant to our lecture today, it's this book called Justiça Divina, or Divine Justice. And guess which book is this all about? Anybody want to guess? Any guesses? Heaven and Hell. Right? So I thought we've done lectures about this before. We've taken certain sections of this book. So today I picked one that was very relevant because it relates to the study we just did this past Thursday in our study of the Heaven and Hell book. So we were looking at spirits that had to suffer on earth, right, where they had they're called terrestrial expiations. And there was a very interesting example or case study that I'd like to share with you. But before, I like to read this section here called Learn and Rebuild. All of the messages in this book are very short, 2 or 3 pages. So they're quick to read, very difficult to understand. So I've translated that to English just to get us started, and then I'll share with you the case study that we have from Heaven and Hell. And we'll try to bring it all together to what it means to us as Spiritists. Told you it was going to be deep, so just take a deep breath. And we'll start here with all wandering spirits who linger in nightmares of revolt awaken one day. Repentance appears in the very heart of their being in joyful tears like prisoners suddenly freed. We know as spirits that as we discarnate, we will be sent to a period of suffering in the spiritual world. It's not hell as been described by other religions, but in Spiritism we call this the umbral. And in fact, it's nothing more than our own conscious creating for us a period of recollection, of insight and thinking of all of the bad things we did in our lives. And it's tough because there are no stronger, harsher judges than our own spirit. And this period can last a short time, or it can last a very long time, depending on how bad and how many mistakes you made in your lives. So what Emmanuel is telling us here through Chico is that everyone eventually will come out of that nightmare of revolt. It is our revolt against our own actions. And one day we finally get to the point where we realize that we have done enough suffering for now, and that it's time to move on. And that realization is like us being freed again. As spirits, we have this sensation of liberty, of freedom, very often in our existence. As we discarnate, there is a certain feeling of liberation of the physical body that we carried for a lifetime. And in the spiritual world, there is this liberty of now we have moved beyond a phase that has been used to let us really understand the implications and consequences of our deeds. This is an important area where the medium groups that all the spirit centers around the world do. Because what we're trying to do is give that last little push for these spirits so they can see now that there is a direction to follow. And they feel like prisoners suddenly being freed, and they will have an assistant that they need to then move on to the next phase. So how did they feel when they were there in this nightmare, the spirit of nightmare? It's like a dungeon. Anybody who's seen the Nosso Lar movie remembers the images of the umbral. And this is what Emmanuel talks here. He says, once destroyed the dark dungeon where they lay chained. Remember, we create the dungeon and we create the chains for ourselves. Unless they breathe freedom among friends who extend their arms. So does that mean that these spirits who are there to help were just doing nothing for the whole time, just watching us suffer? No. They were there praying for us. Praying for our soul, praying for our spirit, hoping that we can move past that phase as fast as possible, but no faster, because that is part of our evolution. So now the spirit finally sees the light, and they can move out of that umbral. But they know, however, that the shadow they still carry, in contrast with the light in which they bathe transfigured, in which they yearn to deserve. So they know that the period of suffering that they have gone through is part of their healing, but it has not resolved all of the issues that they carry. Those are the shadows of our past mistakes. And we want to be bathed in this wonderful light that God gives us. They want to deserve it, but we know at that stage that we do not yet deserve it. So it is still a troubling time for the spirit. So the spirit still feels like, and the description here is beautiful, right? They feel like injured birds that recognize the value of the physical experience. where it was up to them to rebuild their own wings and turn anxiously to looking for the old nest of service and love that comforts and restores. Almost always, however, opportunities passed, friendly landscapes changed completely, faculties vanished and abandoned, affections evolved into other directions. So what does this all say to us? That having gone through that period of self-analysis in the umbral, we realize the mistakes we've made, but also we realize how many opportunities we missed to avoid the mistake or to correct them. So we feel fragile. We feel like we are failures in some ways. That's the injured bird, right? They recognize the physical experience. So we recognize that we had a chance as incarnate spirits to fix that. So now we're doubly troubled, right? We're troubled because we made a mistake, and we're troubled that we remember that we had a chance to do better, and we just let it pass by. Those are the opportunities that passed, landscapes that changed. So the right moment was at a certain moment to say, I'm sorry, to ask for forgiveness, to help somebody in need, and we just let it pass. It won't come back to you again. That same opportunity will not be there, right? Faculties vanished. That has to do with our ability to do what's right, whether we were healthy at one point in our lives, whether we have the time, we have the strength, we have the economic or financial ability to do that. We miss those, and then they're gone. We're older, we're sicker, we're poorer, whatever. So the Spirit is collecting all of this, and it's suffering yet again. Remembers all of the abandoned affections, all of the people, and there are always many, that try to put us in the right direction through loving advice, through caring for us, and we ignore them every time. And now they're gone. They've moved on. Still, we can't not do anything. The Spirit now understands as well that there is a journey that we must proceed. The law of progress tells us that we will not go back, that we can't stagnate. We stagnated kind of in the umbral while we're trying to go through that phase. Now it's time to move on. So now, how do we move on? So those who had temporary power, holders of temporary power, who abuse the people, right? And this can be all of us at different levels. Obviously, if you're a politician, if you're someone in a position of authority who abused someone under your care, it's a special, more severe care. But in our lives, we're always going to face situations where we have, quote, a power over the destiny or the feelings of others. So these people feel the privation of the lower classes by witnessing the silent martyrdom of those who rise up each day to contemplate their own misery. So now I start to put myself in the shoes of the people I hurt. I feel their suffering, their lack of hope that have been created by those in power that are kind of repressing them, oppressing their lives, hurting them. Misers that rolled in gold return to the rich walls of their descendants. So I was a billionaire. I left money for my children, my grandchildren, and so forth. Now I come back as a spirit, and what do I see? I follow the beggars who plead for charity, observing how much it hurts to beg for crumbs of hearts petrified in pride. And what was the source of this stone heart? It was my actions in many ways. Of course, my descendants have their own responsibilities in this, but I could have done something differently. And now I'm suffering with those beggars, those who want and need something in charity. This one is even more interesting. Writers who are experts in slander and scandal face their own readers. And this might not be just writers. It could be bloggers. It could be people just talking, gossipers, right? Gossipers and writers, same idea. Those who create these slander and scandal messages or stories about others. Face their own readers, observing the narcotic and corrosive mental effects they secreted unpunished while alive. Careless or inhuman fathers and mothers return to the domestic bastion of their disoriented descendants, seeing the roots of addictions or cruelty planted by themselves. Evildoers who fell into delinquency assist the victims of other common criminals, feeling the grief process of those who pleaded to the heart and soul of their fellow men and did not get anything in return. So you see that for every one of our sins or mistakes, we will come back and we will experience the consequences, if not by our actions, by others like us, and how that impacts and that hurts other spirits. But this is not enough. After learning, we need to return to the field of action. So just feeling this and suffering is not enough. We have to go back and do something. To be born again and repay. To progress and improve. Settling debt by debt before the law. And which law? The divine laws, not the human laws. My fellow of this world, and this is Emmanuel talking to us, every one of us. Don't think at one moment that we not fit possibly almost every one of those categories at one point in our existence or even in this existence. If the knowledge of reincarnation already brings us joy and comfort, right? You know that life on earth is a precious store of work and study with many payment options. So we don't have just one way of repaying our debts or settling our debts. There are many ways that we can do this. So it's not by the lack of opportunity that we will not accomplish this in our life. And thus, whatever the ordeal that points in the way, suffer, love, and thank God. So that's why I feel so kind of frustrated that this book is not always already translated in English, because it's like this in every one of the chapters. Emmanuel is talking to us harshly, very honestly, but with a sense of love and care for us. He's not telling you these things because he wants us to feel bad. He's telling these things because he wants us to wake up in us what we already know. That we have prepared ourselves in our last reincarnation planning process of what we wanted to do in this life. And that we could be missing opportunities at every day. So that's the passage from the book, from Emmanuel. So this is the case study that we studied this week in our study of the heaven and hell. And I thought it was very much appropriate to all of this. So this is from the chapter called Earthly Expiations, and it's going to tell us a story of a spirit called Jose Mussi. I will tell you who he was and why he is important to our story. And this comes from part 2. So part 1 of Heaven and Hell talks a lot about the concept of divine justice and punishment and how we created this over the centuries in religions, this notion of heaven and hell, and how this really gets interpreted through Spiritism. What is heaven? What is hell? What is punishment? What is reward? Part 2 is a large number of case studies that Kardec collected through his work in the Parisian Spiritist Society, where they had frequent mediumship meetings, and often they would, at the time, receive spirits that had deceased recently. So they had good information about what happened to the spirit were alive, and now the spirit is coming back and telling them what has happened since they have departed. So this is the case of this spirit. I don't know if it's Zimo or Zymo. So, Zymo Slizgo was a poor Jew from Vilna. Vilna actually is, interesting enough, is the birthplace of my father-in-law. It was a mixture of Lithuanian, Poland, and Russia at different times. That region has changed hands very often. I believe that at the time it was Prussia. He died in May of 1865. So a few weeks later, they have the mediumship, the meeting, and they talk to the spirit. And this is what they knew about this person in his life. For 30 years, he begged in his hometown with a small bow in his hands. Everywhere in town, his call was familiar, right? Remember the poor, the widows, and the orphans. So this could have been one of thousands of beggars that existed. And often, beggars who create whatever message they want to get money from people, and then they use the money for their own purpose, not necessarily what they were claiming for. 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lady that was begging on the corner of Young and Bloor, and she would beg for all day, and then at the end of the day, she would get into her car and go home. And this was documented by the Toronto Star. So was this the case with Zimmo? No, the fact was that, no, he was honest. He was true to what he was saying. Over that time, over 30, he collected 90,000 rubles. I don't know what that would represent, but I'm presuming it's a substantial amount of money, right? But he did not keep a single kopeck, cent, for himself. He used the money to relieve the sick. He himself looked after them. He paid the education of poor children and distributed the food he was given to the needy. So how did he survive, right? At night, Zimmo would spend time preparing snuff. Snuff is that tobacco that you have to crunch and you sniff, right? Very popular at the time. So that's, after begging all day, taking care of the poor, he would then prepare the tobacco. And the tobacco that he sold, he would use that money for his own keeping. But if that was more than he needed, he would also give that to the poor. So a very charitable person. To the point that what struck Kardec and his other mediums is that he had been alone in the world, right? And the book tells a lot more about his life, how he grew up, and how he started to beg at the age of 30 years old. I won't go into that detail here today, but what's important is that he never created an institution, he never recruited other people to help him. This was something that he wanted to do, and he did by himself during over 30 years. He died at, we don't know the exact date, they don't say in the book, but he was in his 60s when he passed. So for over 30 years, he did this by himself. But he was a beggar, someone in the street. But everybody knew him in town. And everybody knew what he was doing. To the point that the day of his burial, a large part of Vilna's population followed his funeral procession, and all the shops closed their doors. Do we see that happening today? If a beggar dies in the street, what do we see? We see a little footnote in a newspaper saying that one more homeless person has died. So he had a fascinating life. So you would say this is a very evolved spirit who came here to suffer because he has evolved way beyond us. And he is able to do things that we cannot do. Right? Of course, you know that I'm asking this because the answer is wrong. So, now it's the spirit now talking back to the medium. So he's invoked in this evening session. And these are the notes that we have that's recorded in the book of what he told the mediums. So the spirit comes in, and obviously he can understand what everyone is thinking. So everybody kind of read the obituary of the spirit, and they invoke him, trying to know what happened with him. And he knows that everybody's wondering, yeah, why does a beggar get so much attention? Is there something behind the story that we don't know? So he immediately comes in and he says, it seems odd to you that the public displays were so impressive in paying homage to the memory of a nobody. So he knows he was a nobody, or what we would consider a nobody. A kind of a shadow that walks through the streets and we don't pay much attention. whose charity enabled to attract such sympathy. So if he was so special, why didn't people help him before he died? Right? If people thought what he was doing was so important, why did he wait for him to die to show some level of respect and homage? Here's his point. The moral pressure exerted upon humankind through practicing the good is such that no matter how material one might be, and that would represent everyone in the city, right? Material, living, surviving, this is the 19th century, life is tough. One always bows before it. The good is always respected. It is welcome despite the tendency one may have towards evil. And we always remember the word evil. Don't think that evil is that, serial killer, that dictator. Yes, they are evil. But evil is every act that we do that disrespect divine laws. Every one of us, at one point, performs, in this definition, evil acts. Because they're not working towards good. But what the Spirit is saying, and he's now back in the spiritual world, he says, listen, we have moral pressure. A moral pressure that exists inside each one of us. No matter how bad you may think a person is, that moral pressure is hidden somewhere in there. And at certain points, they surfaced. And that's what happened when they realized that he had died. And what they could do at that point is just walk with him to his burial. So, remember that I said, is Zeno this great elevated spirit? Well, he starts to tell about his previous life. Many centuries ago, I lived with the title of king, or at least a sovereign prince. Within the sphere of my power, right? So this is back in medieval Europe, right? He doesn't say where he lived. We can assume he might be in the same city, but he doesn't. But he never tells us exactly where it was. But within my sphere of power, we're very limited compared to today's state. Today is 1865. I was nevertheless the absolute lord of my vassal's fate. So he had land. He was a landowner. And we know that in Europe, whoever had land owned the poor servants that had to work and live there. I act as a tyrant. Or rather, let's use the proper term, tormentor. He can now recognize this. But let's see how long it took for him to know this. Of imperious character, I was violent, avaricious, and lustful. So from these three words, violent, avaricious is greedy, lustful is, what you can imagine what a tyrant would do with the women that were under his power. You can imagine the fate of the poor beings who lived under my laws, if you can call the word law into this. It was his rules, which he called law. I abused my power to oppress the weak, to tax all types of trades, occupations, passions, and pains for the service of my own passions. So he was a dictator, a very ruthless one. I even imposed a tithe, which is another word for tax, on what beggars made. So he was so greedy that even beggars had to pay him tax. No one could beg for anything without my first taking of the lion's share of the alms, which is another word for donations. Right? That human pity let drop into the pockets of poverty. There was even more, so that the number of beggars would not decrease among my vassals. So he wanted people to be beggars, to suffer, to collect money for him. I forbade these unfortunate beings from sharing with their friends, relatives, or kin any of the pittances that remained. In other words, I was the most heartless in every way regarding suffering and poverty. So you start to see a pattern here in what he lived here in this life and what he came to be in the latest reincarnation that he had. I finally lost what you call life. And these are his words, right? That's been recorded by Kardec. In the midst of torment and horrendous suffering, my death was an example of terror. Where we can imagine various scenarios, how tyrants die. Could have been disease, it could have been violence against them, could have been many things. As a spirit, so here's the first catch. I remained in the errant state for 3.5 centuries. And at the end of that time, I finally understood that the purpose of reincarnation was something completely different than what my gross and obtuse sense had led me to pursue in the previous one. So he starts to get the purpose of reincarnation. First lesson. I hope that we have gone through that lesson already. To understand the purpose of reincarnation. So this is kind of gross, so if you don't have a good heart. I remained a long time, quite a long time, linked by my perispirit to my rotting corpse. It's part of his suffering. Until it had decayed completely, I felt myself devoured by worms, which made me suffer terribly. When I found myself free of the fetters that had kept me prisoner to the instrument of my torture. So that's what we, especially in the Hollywooden culture, think of horror is physical. It's pain. It's worms eating our rotting body. Typical of a horror film, right? So he's now finally, there's nothing left. Everything physical is gone. So, okay, so now it's over, right? No. I had to endure an even crueler torment. So what can be crueler than feeling for years worms devour your physical body, still attached to you by your perispirit. So your spirit is feeling every one of those sensations. What can be harsher than that? After my physical suffering, and the word physical here should be in quotes, because he's a spirit, but he's getting the reflections of physical pain through his perispirit in that connection that was forced for him to experience, came mental suffering, which was even more long-lasting than the former. So this will add up to those 350 years. So what did he experience during that period? I was put in the presence of all the victims I had afflicted. Periodically, a power superior to mine led me to face my guilty actions. So for 350 years, or whatever was after, minus the physical part, he would see every day, one by one, the people that he hurt. And he would be asked to face his actions mentally. I physically and mentally saw all the pain that I had made others to endure. So think of all the bad things that he did and how each individual suffered. Physically, mentally, financially, all of the different things. He had to, again, experience the pain of each one of them, one at a time. Oh, my friends, how terrifying is the constant sight of those whom we did evil. And I find interesting this phrase is because he's not complaining about the feeling of their pains. What suffers most is the constant sight. And isn't it true for us that we often can commit some mistakes? And as long as we don't see the people that we've hurt, it's okay with us? That we kind of forget. Sometimes we don't, but often it's easier to forget if they're not next to us, or we don't see them, or maybe they have died. But what if you were made to see them close to you every day? And all of the pain, all of the realization of your consequence come to you. That is the process that we go through in trying to understand the real consequences, cause and effect of our actions. But God is merciful. God will not allow any of us to remain in that state forever. This is not hell. It's not eternal hell. we all have a time where we need to move on. So in answer to my prayers, the resignation and remorse. So only when you start to get the real remorse for your actions, I receive permission to take upon myself the physical task of enduring the same torments. So he experienced all of this in the spiritual world, but he needs to come back and reincarnate and experience some of that. It's not going to be anywhere near all of the experience he had, because that was centuries. But he needs to go through in the physical world something similar. But he asks, and much more. He asked that I had inflicted. I obtained this permission, and through my free will, God granted me the right to amplify my mental and physical suffering. So he kind of had a notion of what he needed to do. He says, that's not bad enough. I need to be challenged more. My trials have to be harsher. And I am asking God's permission, because God is merciful. He's not going to force that upon us. But it's our free will as a spirit that is saying to God and pleading to God, let me suffer more. Let me have a harsher trial. Thanks to the support of the good spirits assisting me, and they were assisting him for 350 years, whether he realized them or not. I persisted in my resolution to practice the good and kept them, for they kept me from succumbing under the load I had taken upon my shoulders. So he realizes that in many moments during his life, he was about to give up. That he thought that I had asked too much. I basically just didn't realize that I couldn't be that strong. And who helped him? Were the good spirits that were with him, that are with each one of us, helping us achieve what we have proposed to do in this life. So he completes this. I am still not perfect, but knowing that evil only leads to evil, I shall do good. And our eyes already have, in order to reap happiness. So what do we get from this? Well, we understand why he had this life in helping widows and people, children, the sick, because he harmed people just like that in his previous life, horribly. He was rich, powerful, and he came back with nothing, poor, a Jew beggar, which was probably in the scale of things at the time. Jewish beggars were the low end of the beggar scale. Right? So that's what he wanted. He asked for that. And if it wasn't that the cause of his life, he would not have the strength to have supported it. And he works through this life, and he's able to accomplish this with the constant praying and help of his guiding spirits. But you think back to my original question, is he a superior spirit? No, he was a horrible spirit, still very, very immature, underdeveloped, doing all kinds of mistakes. And he has now this opportunity to fix it. Does that make him a perfect spirit now? Not even close. He probably has not mended all of the errors he's made. He's made great progress. And that's the real lesson that we take from this study. We are not here to be perfects yet. We're not here to be saints, to be enlightened spirits in this life. We're here to accomplish what we've proposed to do, even though we may not know what that is, or remember what that is. Our spirit knows. That what we're trying to do is, in any way we can. Remember in the beginning, Emmanuel says there's so many ways for us to do payments. Those are the options that God has given us. How can we help each other? How can we do good without necessarily expecting payback for that? Because the reality is we're great debtors. We have tremendous debt in our spirit of all the bad things, all the wrong things, and all the mistakes we have done in all of the lives that we have existed. But let's not that bring us down. Let's not just say, well, I'll never do it, so why bother? We do it because we must evolve. The law of progress tells us that. That is a divine law. We have one direction to go, and it's only us who can make the little steps every day to make sure that we're going in that direction. Don't think of ourselves as special spirits, great spirits, good people. We often may have the feeling that, okay, I'm a good person. I don't go around robbing people or hurting people on purpose, so I must be an evolved spirit. That is really, really wrong. That is the wrong way to take this. Think of all the things that you could have done better, and then you realize how imperfect you are, and we are. But also have faith that working with others, working in community, and that's the reason God created us as social animals. We cannot do this by ourselves. Yes, it is our path of evolution. It is our responsibility. But we cannot do this by ourselves. Zygmunt could not have done this. Zygmunt could not have done this by himself. And it took him a long time to even get to the point of understanding where he was going wrong. We need each other. We need those who are incarnated in our lives. And we need all of those good spirits that surround us, that gives us strength and gives us inspiration and help us, talking to us of what we should be doing. Our difficult lesson is learning to listen to them. Even in the harsher times where we're suffering most, they're still talking to us. Thank you very much. I still have a few minutes, so I'd be more than happy to take questions. I know this was like I said, I warned you, it was a bit of deep thinking, but I think it does bring us into context. Some of the effort, the time, and the sacrifices we make this year, every year, in trying to come and study and learn exactly what are the divine laws and what should we be doing. So, who's going to be first? Yes?
When you were talking about what's the name again? The beggar?
Yeah, Zimo.
You're talking about after he disincarnated as the fire.
Yes?
And he realized what he did. And he spent those years, 350 years, seeing people over again and experiencing what they. Was this all in the spirit world?
Yes, it was all in the spiritual. All of this, it took him 350 years to reincarnate.
Wow. It's a long time.
It is. It is. But, there is a reason for that. Because if he reincarnates too soon, he would not really be prepared to try to mend his mistakes.
You wrote and also in the story, you're saying he prepared himself for his reincarnation. What did you mean that? What does it mean by he prepared himself?
Well, I saw that he said that I asked God to have a harsher life. Right? So in many ways, and obviously he doesn't go through that detail. At one point, he goes to these 350 odd years, whatever, and when you said he realized the mistake, remember, he probably realized this mistake after 348 years, or something of that sort. It doesn't come fully the minute you discarnate, and that's why you have to go through that pain and that suffering and that experience of sitting or stepping into other people's shoes. But once you know that, and once he realizes the purpose of reincarnation, why he had to come back as a poor beggar to this life, they had to plan his life, right? How is he going to come back as a Jewish person, as a poor person? What's going to happen in his life? And he talks a little bit about this in his testimony, that made him become alone. He had parents, he had sisters and brothers, But he loses all of them along the way. He becomes an orphan and he loses all his siblings. But there are nephews and nieces that are left behind. So all of this that kind of led him to the point that at 30 he becomes and he makes this commitment to be the beggar that's going to collect money for all the widows and orphans. That was kind of planned before he even comes back to life. That's what we call the reincarnatory planning. So it doesn't mean that everything is going to be exactly like we plan. Even the best laid plans go wrong. And that's also true in our lives. But it sets the stage, it sets the context. It says, his plan was, I will come back and I will suffer so much, but I will not let that suffering stop me from being charitable. I will be poor, I will starve, I will be hungry, I will have no assets, no money. But none of that should stop me from achieving my purpose, which is to help those who are as unfortunate as I would be. So that's what I was saying in terms of that planning that takes place. And he was pushing the envelope, as he describes, asking harsher and harsher conditions, because he felt that after 350 years, he realized that he had a lot of things to make up for. Yes?
Does Zimmo mention what his chief aim was in incarnating as that prince? Can you repeat the question?
He's asking, what was Zimmo's original planning when he came as the rich prince to begin with? No, he does not. We do not know that. We can speculate, but no, he doesn't. It's all about his last life and how that life was only possible because he was such a bad person before.
What I'm getting at is, was it part of like the master plan that he was going to be given this absolute power over, all these people and, be able to exercise whatever he wanted, and then ultimately he would have to come back?
Probably not. It's the way that we understand it may or may not be like that. But I think the question is, all of these lives that Zimmo and us that we have, is it like we're ready? Is there a planning for the next 20 lives to say that we're going to go through this and we're going to evolve? I would say not, because so much of what happens in any one of these phases depends on our own free will. And you can't plan for that completely. Right? We fail. We are imperfect. Think of your life. How many times I've said, I'm going to lose weight while I eat this chocolate bar. Right? Question here. I'll get back to the folks in the back.
So the idea is that in this planning, before you're reincarnating, ideally, or unless you tell me otherwise, you're planning for this ideal, good, giving, all of these positive things that you're supposed to do in this life, this plan that you have. And then really it comes down to you to either execute it or take the easy route.
So the question is just confirming if during the reincarnatory planning, is it just about planning all of the good things that we're going to do, all of the positive actions we're going to take, and then it's a matter that after that is all about how much of it we actually do versus how often we take the easy path. Yes, in a broad term it is. But remember that every reincarnation is different. So it might not be necessarily, in his case, he had to amend direct charity. Often, it might be that we're coming in this life to address one particular failure of ours. It could be pride, for example. It could be that we're envious, right? Or that, take any one of the various negative things that we can say in terms of our behavior. We might be coming to address that particular issue. Because remember, reincarnation is a very, very long time. Thousands of reincarnations. We're really taking baby steps here. Trying to correct. And we will not get 100% right. We can't. We are imperfect. Right? So now, once you go back, the first thing you realize once you discarnate is how stupid Right? How could I not have done that? It seemed so simple when we were planning this 80 years ago before I incarnated, and idiot of me could not do it. Right? And that hurts. That hurts a lot because we will feel like we're disappointing God. Because it is our commitment with God in our path that we've proposed to come. Was our choice, and we propose to do it, and then we fail. So imagine how hurtful that would be. But God is merciful. He said, "Okay, you got a couple more thousand lives. We can deal with this, right?" And that's, God acts through the good spirits that He puts besides us. Your guiding spirit, your good spirit that has been with you all your life, knows what you went through and at what point you made the wrong choices, and you will evaluate this. And we see André Luiz in his books telling how he goes through that process himself, trying to understand what he thought it was okay in life becomes so obviously wrong in the spiritual world. Teresa? Can you speak up? I can't even hear you.
So just going back to
Sean's question, yes?
It's a master plan that he sent you to this, so he would pretty much fail, so then he would come as a beggar. It's for you to believe that he sent you to fail, like he was set up to fail, and we know we'll never be set up to fail, right? So you cannot think that this was done in purpose so he could come as a beggar, because then you would think that there was a whole incarnation, but literally God set him up to favor, and that would never happen. So he probably came rich, again, he probably been programmed that incarnation as well. I want to come rich because I'm going to do so good to so many people. And he came, and we all have our free will. And he had his free will to say, oh, you know what, I like all this money. And he let his selfishness and his will to take over to whatever he had promised before, right? So he failed. But he failed because of his own free will. The same way that he created this plan to come as a beggar, he even asked to be harsher and then what actually was proposed to him, and he could have failed the same way. He said, you know what, this is too much, I'm going to beg for this money and keep it to myself. He could have done it. He could have made his own choice to say, you know what, I'm going to save myself and let his pride and his selfishness come back again, because he still had it inside of him. That's why, like you just said, he had the moments he said, this is too much, maybe I'm going to give up, but the good spirits gave him the strength to keep going. He could have failed again. So to believe that there is a master plan where you put in one situation here because then you're going to fail and then you can go to another would be really to believe that God's setting us up for failure. That would never happen. We all set up here for just one thing. And I'm saying this because a lot of people sometimes come to the Wednesdays courses and they ask, well, I would like to know what contract I signed, like what I was meant to be. And it's very easy. We all here sign a contract to come and follow the laws of love and charity. That's basically what it is, right?
That's the direction. And remember, the concept of failure or success is always relative. It may be that in my previous life I was wrong 80% of the time. In this life I'm going to be wrong 72% of the time. So that's success for me. Right? As long as I don't fail 81% of the time, then that's okay. So I'll take one last question in the back.
Yeah, I was so pretty much what
It is.
like Teresa was saying, like, so when we reincarnate, for example, if someone comes back as a rich person, usually it's what you do with the money. You're rich. The way you handle your how rich you are and what you do in life, if you do something good or something bad, and then to thinking towards the next life, it's almost like when you see it's very childish way of explaining it. Like you see those science fiction movies where they time travel and somebody's like a seer, or they see the future and then they say, oh, there's this timeline and then there's this timeline, if you do this and this could happen and this could happen. It depends all in that life, and it almost branches it depending on what you do, and then your next life would be the consequence.
Can we see their next lives? Can we have the ability to see the future and know what's going to happen? No. Because of this thing called free will. Not only our free will, but everyone around us. Remember that I said that we need to be this in together. If I'm trying to do good, and Marcio here is, because of his free will has kind of wobbled a bit, and he does something that causes me to die, for example, and I didn't achieve my goals. Right? That's possible. Because he made a choice at one point in time that wasn't necessarily in his plan. And of course, I wouldn't have known about it. But again, remember, we have to remember the very first slide around what we know as reality versus infinity. This is just kind of a blink in time in our evolution. Right? So we make a mistake here, we fix there, we make a mistake there, somebody makes another mistake, and we're all evolving. So the important thing here is our overall trend of where we're going and the overall trend of humanity. This world needs to evolve. That's another aspect of the Spiritist study, is the evolution of worlds, of the humanity as a group, not as us as individuals. But that's topic for another 4 hours of debate. And I wanted to use this just as an example of what we do every Wednesdays and Thursdays in our study. So this is exactly what we try to bring in, is bring the topics, and then let's have this discussion. Let's try to understand what Emmanuel, what Kardec, and all the good writers that have been given us provide us. So it is kind of a pitch as well for everyone that can to join us on Wednesdays or on Thursdays. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who's watching us through the internet. We're gonna get prepared for the passes. So I just want to ask you all to be quiet, be in silence for now. And in a second, we're gonna call the kids to come into the room, and then we start the passes. Okay?